Franz Kafka's The Trial. Chapter 6. Kay's uncle, LENI. One afternoon, it was just before the day's letters went out, and Kay was very busy. Two clerks bringing him some papers to sign were thrust aside, and his uncle Carl, a small landowner from the country, came striding into the room. Kay was the less alarmed by the arrival of his uncle, since for a long time he had been shrinking from it in anticipation. His uncle was bound to turn up. He had been convinced of that for about a month past. He had often pictured him just as he appeared now, his back slightly bent, his Panama hat crushed in the left hand, stretching out his right hand from the very doorway, and then thrusting it recklessly across the desk, knocking over everything that came in its way. His uncle was always in a hurry, for he was harassed by the disastrous idea that whenever he came to town for the day he must get through all the program he had drawn up for himself, and must not miss either a single chance of a conversation or a piece of business or an entertainment. In all this, Kay, who, as his former word, was peculiarly obliged to him, had to help him as best he could, and also sometimes put him up for the night. A ghost from the past, he was in the habit of calling him. Immediately after his first greetings, he had no time to sit down in the chair which Kay offered him. He begged Kay to have a short talk with him in strict privacy. "It is necessary," he said, painfully gulping. "It is necessary for my peace of mind, Kay." At once sent his clerks out of the room with instructions to admit no one. "What is this I hear, Joseph?" cried the uncle, when they were alone, sitting down on the desk and making himself comfortable by stuffing several papers under him without looking at them. Kay said nothing. He knew what was coming, but being suddenly released from the strain of exacting work, he resigned himself for the moment to a pleasant sense of indolence, and gazed out through the window at the opposite side of the street, of which only a small triangular section could be seen from where he was sitting, a slice of empty house wall between two shop windows. "You sit there staring out of the window," cried his uncle, flinging up his arms. "For God's sake, Joseph, answer me. Is it true? Can it be true?" "Dear uncle," said Kay, tearing himself out of his reverie, "I don't know in the least what you mean." "Joseph," said his uncle warningly, "you've always told the truth as far as I know. Am I to take these words of yours as a bad sign?" "I can guess certainly what you're after," said Kay accommodatingly. "You've probably heard something about my trial." "That is so," replied his uncle, nodding gravely. "I have heard about your trial." "But from whom?" asked Kay. "Erna wrote to me about it," said his uncle. "She doesn't see much of you. I know you don't pay much attention to her, I regret to say, and yet it seems to be a sufficient one. I can read you the bit from her letter that mentions you. He took the letter from his wallet. Here it is. She writes, I haven't seen Joseph for a long time. Last week I called at the bank, but Joseph was so busy that I couldn't see him. I waited for almost an hour. But I had to leave then, for I had a piano lesson. I should have liked very much to speak to him. Perhaps I shall soon have the chance. He sent me a great big box of chocolates for my birthday. It was very sweet and thoughtful of him. I forgot to write and mention it at the time, and it was only your asking that reminded me. For I may tell you that chocolate vanishes on the spot in the boarding school. Hardly do you realize that you've been presented with a box when it's gone. But about Joseph, there is something else that I feel I should tell you. As I said, I was not able to see him at the bank because he was engaged with a gentleman. After I had waited meekly for a while, I asked an attendant if the interview was likely to last much longer. He said that might very well be, for it had probably something to do with the case, which was being brought against the chief clerk. I asked what case, and was he not mistaken, but he said he was not mistaken. There was a case, and a very serious one too, but more than that, he did not know. He himself would like to help Herr K, for he was a good and just man, and he did not know how he was to do it, and he only wished that some influential gentleman would take the chief clerk's part. To be sure, that was certain to happen, and everything would be all right in the end. But for the time being, as he could see from Erke's state of mind, things looked far from well. Naturally, I did not take all this too seriously. I tried to reassure the simple fellow, and forbade him to talk about it to anyone else. And I'm sure it's just idle gossip. All the same, it might be as well if you, dearest father, were to inquire into it on your next visit to town. It will be easy for you to find out the real state of things, and if necessary to get some of your It will be easy for you to find out the real state of things, and if necessary to get some of your influential friends to intervene, even if it shouldn't be necessary, and that is most likely. At least it will give your daughter an early chance of welcoming you with a kiss, which would please her. A good child, said Kay's uncle, when he had finished reading, wiping a tear from his eye. Kay nodded. He had completely forgotten Erna among the various troubles he had had lately, and the story about the chocolates she had obviously invented simply to save his face before his uncle and aunt. It was really touching, and the theater tickets, which he now resolved to send her regularly, would be a very inadequate return. But he did not feel equal at present to calling at her boarding school and chattering to an 18-year-old flapper. And what have you got to say now? Asked his uncle, who had temporarily forgotten all his haste and agitation over the letter, which he seemed to be rereading. Yes, uncle, said Kay. It's quite true. True? Cried the uncle. What is true? How on earth can it be true? is this? Not a criminal case, surely. A criminal case, answered Kay. And you sit there coolly, with a criminal case hanging round your neck, cried his uncle, his voice growing louder and louder. The cooler I am, the better, in the end, said Kay wearily. Don't worry, that's a fine thing to ask of me, cried his uncle. Joseph, my dear Joseph, think of yourself, think of your relatives, think of our good name. You have been a credit to us until now. You can't become a family disgrace. Your attitude, he looked at Kay, with his head slightly cocked, doesn't please me at all. That isn't how an innocent man behaves if he's still in his senses. Just tell me quickly what it is all about, so that I can help you. It's something to do with the bank, of course. No, said Kay, getting up, but you're talking too loudly. Uncle, I feel pretty certain the attendant is listening at the door, and I dislike the idea. We had better go out somewhere. I'll answer all your questions, then, as far as I can. I know quite well that I owe the family an explanation. Right, cried his uncle. Quite right. But hurry, Joseph, hurry. I have only to leave some instructions, said Kay, and he summoned his chief assistant by telephone, who appeared in a few minutes. In his agitation, Kay's uncle indicated to the clerk by a sweep of the hand that Kay had sent for him, which of course was obvious enough. Kay, standing beside his desk, took up various papers, and in a low voice explained to the young man, who listened coolly, but attentively, what must be done in his absence. His uncle disturbed him by standing beside him, round-eyed and biting his lips nervously. He was not actually listening, but the appearance of listening was disturbing enough in itself. He next began to pace up and down the room, pausing every now and then by the window or before a picture with sudden ejaculations such as, "It's completely incomprehensible to me," or "Goodness knows what's to come of this." The young man behaved as if he noticed nothing, quietly heard Kay's instructions to the end, took a few notes, and went after having bowed down to Kay and to his uncle, who, however, had his back to him just then and was gazing out the window, flinging out his arms and clutching at curtains. The door had scarcely closed when Kay's uncle cried, "At last, that jackass has gone. Now we can go too. At last." Unluckily, Kay could find no means to make his uncle stop inquiring about the case in the main vestibule, where several clerks and attendants were standing about, while the assistant manager himself was crossing the floor. "Come now, Joseph," began his uncle, returning a brief nod to the bows of the waiting clerks. "Tell me frankly now, what kind of a case this is." He made a few non-committal remarks, laughing a little, and only on the staircase explained to his uncle that he had not wanted to speak openly before the clerks. "Right," said his uncle, "but get it off your chest now." He listened with bent head, puffing hastily at a cigar. "The first thing to grasp, uncle," said Kay, "is that this is not a case before an ordinary court." "That's bad," said his uncle. "What do you mean?" asked Kay, looking at his uncle. "I mean that it's bad," repeated his uncle. They were standing on the outside steps of the bank as the doorkeeper seemed to be listening. Kay dragged his uncle away. They were swallowed up in the street traffic. The uncle, who had taken Kay's arm, now no longer inquired so urgently about the case, and fast at last, stopping so suddenly that the people walking behind him shied off in alarm. Things like this don't occur suddenly. They pile up gradually. There must have been indications. Why did you never write to me? You know I would do anything for you. I'm still your guardian in a sense, and till now I have been proud of it. Of course I'll do what I can to help you, only it's difficult when the case is already underway. The best thing, at any rate, would be for you to take a short holiday and come to stay with us in the country. You've got a bit thinner. I noticed that now. You'd get back your strength in the country. That would be all to the good, for this trial will certainly be a severe strain on you. But besides that, in a sense, you'd be getting away from the clutches of the court. Here they have all sorts of machinery which they will automatically set in motion against you. Depend on that. But if you were in the country, they would have to appoint agents to get at you by letter or telegram or telephone. That would naturally weaken the effect. Not that you would escape them altogether, but you'd have a breathing space. Still, they might forbid me to go away, said Kay, who was beginning to follow his uncle's line of thought. I don't think they would do that, said his uncle reflectively. After all, they wouldn't lose so much by your going away. I thought, said Kay, taking his uncle's arm to keep him from standing still, that you would attach even less importance to this business than I do. And now you are taking it so seriously. Joseph, cried his uncle, trying to get his arm free, so as to be able to stand still. Only Kay would not let him. You're quite changed. You always used to have such a clear brain, and it is going to fail you now. Do you want to lose this case? And do you know what that would mean? It would mean that you would be absolutely ruined, and that all your relatives would be ruined too, or at least dragged in the dust. Joseph, pull yourself together. Your indifference drives me mad. Looking at you, one would almost believe the old saying, cases of that kind are always lost. Dear uncle, said Kay, it's no use getting excited. It's as useless on your part as it would be on mine. No case is won by getting excited. You might let my practical experience count for something. Look how I respect yours, as I've always done, even when you astonish me. Since you tell me that the family would be involved in any scandal arising from the case, I don't see myself how that could be so, but that's beside the point. I'll submit willingly to your judgment, only I think going to the country would be inadvisable, even from your point of view, for it would look like flight and therefore guilt. Besides, though, I'm more hard-pressed here. I can push the case on my own more energetically. Quite right, said his uncle in a tone of relief, as if he saw their minds converging at last. I only made the suggestion because I thought your indifference would endanger the case while you stayed here, and that it might be better if I took it up for you instead. But if you intend to push it energetically yourself, that of course would be far better. We're agreed on that, then, said Kay. And now can you suggest what my first step should be? I'll have to do a bit of thinking about it naturally, said his uncle. You must consider that I have lived in the country for 20 years almost without a break, and my flair for such matters can't be so good as it was. Various connections of mine with influential persons who would probably know better than I how doesn't matter. The important thing now is to lose no time. Before he had finished speaking, he was already on tiptoe waiting for a taxi, and now shouting an address to the driver, he dragged Kay into the car after him. "We'll drive straight to Hold, the lawyer," he said. "He was at school with me. You know his name, of course. Don't you? You don't? That is really extraordinary. He has quite a considerable reputation as a defending counsel and a poor man's lawyer. But it's as a human being that I'm prepared to pin my faith to him. I'm willing to try anything you suggest," said Kay, though the hasty, headlong way in which his uncle was dealing with the matter caused him some perturbation. It was not very flattering to be driven to a poor man's lawyer as a petitioner. "I did not know," he said, "that in a case like this one could employ a lawyer. But of course," said his uncle, "that's obvious. Why not? And now tell me everything that has happened up to now, so that I have some idea where we stand." Kay at once began his story and left out no single detail, for absolute frankness was the only protest he could make against his uncle's assumption that the case was a terrible disgrace. Fraulein Berstner's name he mentioned only once and in passing, but that did not detract from his frankness, since Fraulein Berstner had no connection with the case. As he told the story, he gazed out through the window and noted that they were approaching the very suburb where the law court had its attic offices. He drew his uncle's attention to this fact, but his uncle did not seem to be particularly struck by the coincidence. The taxi stopped before a dark house. His uncle rang the bell of the first door on the ground floor. While they were waiting, he bared his great teeth in a smile and whispered, 8 o'clock, an unusual time for clients to call. But hold, won't take it amiss from me." Behind a grill in the door, two great dark eyes appeared, gazed at the two visitors for a moment, and then vanished again. Yet the door did not open. Kay and his uncle assured each other that they had really seen a pair of eyes. "A new maid, probably afraid of strangers," said Kay's uncle, and knocked again. Once more the eyes appeared, and now they seemed almost sad. Yet that might have been an illusion created by the naked gas jet which burned just over their heads, and kept hissing shrilly, but gave little light. "Open the door," shouted Kay's uncle, banging upon it with his fist. "We're friends of Herr Hold." "Herr Hold is ill," came a whisper from behind them. A door had opened at the other end of the little passage, and a man in a dressing gown was standing there imparting this information in the hushed voice. Kay's uncle, already furious at having had to wait so long, whirled round shouting, you say he's ill?" and bore down almost threateningly on the man, as if he were the alleged illness in person. "The door has been opened," said the man, indicated the lawyer's door, caught his dressing gown about him, and disappeared. The door really was open. A young girl, Kay recognized the dark, somewhat protuberant eyes, was standing in the entrance hall in a long white apron, holding a candle in her hand. "Next time, be a little smarter in opening the door." Kay's uncle threw at her instead of a greeting, while she sketched a curtsy. "Come on, Joseph," he cried to Kay, who was slowly insinuating himself past the girl. uncle, without any hesitation, made toward an inner door. Kay was still glaring at the door, at the girl, who turned her back on him to bolt the house door. She had a doll-like rounded face. Not only were her pale cheeks and her chin quite round in their modeling, but her temples and the line of her forehead as well. "Joseph!" Kay's uncle shouted again, and he asked the girl, "Is it his heart?" "I think so," said the girl. She had now found time to precede him with the candle and open the door of a room in one corner, which the candlelight had not yet reached. A face with a long beard was raised from a pillow. "Lenny, who is it?" asked the lawyer, who, blinded by the candlelight, could not recognize his visitors. "It's your old friend Albert," said Kay's uncle. "Oh, Albert," said the lawyer, sinking back on his pillow again, as if there were no need to keep up appearances before this visitor. "Are you really in a bad way?" asked Kay's uncle, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I can't believe it. It's one of your heart attacks, and it'll pass over like all the others." "Maybe," said the lawyer in a faint voice, "but it's worse than it's ever been before. I find it difficult to breathe, can't sleep at all, and I'm losing strength daily." "I see," said Kay's uncle, pressing his Panama hat firmly against his knee with his huge hand. "That's bad news. But are you being properly looked after? And it's so gloomy in here, so dark. It's a long time since I was here last, but Kay's uncle with the firm intention of clapping both hands over his mouth and so silencing him. Fortunately, the patient raised himself up in bed behind the girl. Kay's uncle made a wry grimace, as if he were swallowing some nauseous draught, and he said in a smoother voice, "I assure you, we aren't together out of our senses. We aren't altogether out of our senses. If what I ask were impossible, I should not ask it. Please go away now." The girl straightened herself beside the bed, turning full toward Kay's uncle, but with one hand at least, so Kay surmised she was patting the lawyer's hand. "You can discuss anything before Lenny," said the lawyer in a voice of sheer entreaty. "This does not concern myself," said Kay's uncle. "It is not my secret." And he turned away as if washing his hands of the matter, although willing to give the lawyer a moment for reconsideration. "Then whom does it concern?" asked the lawyer in an exhausted voice, lying down again. "My nephew," said Kay's uncle. "I have brought him here with me," and he presented his nephew, Joseph Kay, chief clerk. "Oh," said the sick man with much more animation, stretching out his hand to Kay. "Forgive me, I didn't notice you." "Go now, Lenny," he said to the nurse, clasping her by the hand as if saying goodbye to her for a long time, and she went submissively enough. "So, you haven't come," he said at last to Kay's uncle, who was now appeased that he had gone up to the bed again to pay me a sick visit. "You've come on business." It was as if the thought of a sick visit had paralyzed him until now. So rejuvenated did he look as he supported himself on his elbow, which must itself have been something of a strain, and he kept combing with his fingers a strand of hair in the middle of his beard. "You look much better already," said Kay's uncle, "since that witch went away." He broke off, whispered, "I bet she's listening," and sprang to the door. But there was no one behind the door, and he returned again, not so much disappointed, since her failure to listen seemed to him an act of sheer malice, as embittered. "You are unjust to her," said the lawyer, without adding anything more in defense of his nurse. Perhaps by this reticence he meant to convey that she stood in no need of defense. Then in a much more friendly tone he went on, "As for the case of your nephews, I should certainly consider myself very fortunate if my strength proved equal to such an excessively arduous task. I'm very much afraid that it will not do so, but at any rate I shall make every effort. If I fail, you can always call in someone else to help me. To be quite honest, the case interests me too deeply for me to resist the opportunity of What's bothering you? Well, but how do you come to know about me and my case? Asked Kay. Oh, that's it, said the lawyer, smiling. I'm a lawyer, you see. I move in legal circles where all the various cases are discussed, and the more striking ones are bound to stick in my mind, especially one that concerns the nephew of an old friend of mine. Surely that's not so extraordinary. What's bothering you? Kay's uncle repeated. You're all nerves. So you move in those legal circles? Asked Kay. Yes, replied the lawyer. You ask questions like a child, said Kay's uncle. Whom should I associate with if not with men of my own profession? Added the lawyer. It sounded incontrovertible, and Kay made no answer. But you're attached to the court in the palace of justice, not to the one in the attics, he wanted to say, yet could not bring himself actually to say it. You must consider, the lawyer continued in the tone of one perfunctory, explaining something that should be self-evident. You must consider that this intercourse enables me to benefit my clients in all sorts of ways, some of which cannot be divulged. Of course, I'm somewhat handicapped now because of my illness, but in spite of that, good friends of mine from the law courts visit me now and then, and I learn lots of things from them, perhaps more than many a man in the best of health who spends all his days in the courts. For example, there's a dear friend of mine visiting me at this very moment, and he waved a hand toward a dark corner of the room. Where? Asked Kay, almost rudely, in his first shock of astonishment. He looked round uncertainly. The light of the small candle did not nearly reach the opposite wall, and then some form or other in the dark corner actually began to stir. By the light of the candle, which his uncle now held high above his head, Kay could see an elderly gentleman sitting there at a little table. He must have been sitting without even drawing breath to have remained for so long unnoticed. Now he got up, fussily, obviously displeased to have his presence made known. With his hands, which he flapped like short wings, he seemed to be deprecating all introductions or greetings, trying to show that the last thing he desired was to disturb the other gentleman, and that he only wanted to be transported again to the darkness where his presence might be forgotten. But that privilege could no longer be his. I may say you took us by surprise, said the lawyer in explanation, and he waved his hand to encourage the gentleman to approach, which he did very slowly, and glancing around him hesitantly, but with a certain dignity. The chief clerk of the court. Oh, I beg your pardon. I have not introduced you. This is my friend Albert Kay. This is his nephew Joseph Kay, and this is the chief clerk of the court, who, to return to what I was saying, has been so good as to pay me a visit. The value of such a visit can really be appreciated only by the initiated, who know how dreadfully the clerk of the court is overwhelmed with work.
was balancing the candle on his thigh. The lawyer often glanced at it in apprehension, had soon rid himself of his embarrassment, and was now delightedly absorbed in the clerk of the court's eloquence and the delicate wave-like gestures of the hand with which he accompanied it. Kay, leaning against the bedpost, was completely ignored by the clerk of the court, perhaps by deliberate intention, and served merely as an audience to the old gentleman. Besides, he could hardly follow the conversation, and was thinking first of the nurse and the rude treatment she had received from his uncle, and then wondering if he had not seen the clerk of the court before, perhaps actually among the audience during his first interrogation. He might be mistaken, yet the clerk of the court would have fitted excellently into the first row of the audience, the elderly gentleman with the brittle beards. Then a sound from the entrance hall, as of breaking crockery, made them all prick up their ears. "I'll go and see what has happened," said Kay, and he went out, rather slowly, to give the others a chance to call him back. Hardly had he reached the entrance hall, and was beginning to grope his way in the darkness, when a hand much smaller than his own covered the hand with which he was still holding the door, and gently drew the door shut. It was the nurse, who had been waiting there. "Nothing has happened," she whispered. "I simply flung a plate against the wall to bring you out." Kay said, in his embarrassment, "I was thinking of you too." "That's all the better," said the nurse. "Come this way." A step or two brought them to a door paneled with thick glass, which she opened. "In here," she said. It was evidently the lawyer's office, as far as one could see in the moonlight, which brilliantly lit up a small square section of the floor in front of each of the two large windows. It was fitted out with solid antique furniture. "Here," said the nurse, pointing to a dark chest with a carved wooden back. After he had sat down, Kay still kept looking round the room. It was a lofty, spacious room. The clients of this poor man's lawyer must feel lost in it. Kay pictured to himself the timid short steps with which they would advance to the huge table, but then he forgot all this, and had eyes only for the nurse, who was sitting very close to him, almost squeezing him against the arm of the bench. "I thought," she said, "you would come out of your own accord, without waiting till I had to call you out. A queer way to behave. You couldn't keep your eyes off me from the moment you came in, and yet you leave me to wait. And you'd better just call me Lenny," she added quickly and abruptly, as if there were not a moment to waste. "I'll be glad to," said Kay, "but as for my queer behavior, Lenny, that's easy to explain. In the first place, I had to listen to these old men jabbering. I couldn't simply walk out and leave them without any excuse. And in the second place, I'm not in the least a bold young man, but rather shy to tell the truth. And you too, Lenny, really didn't look as if you were to be had for the asking." "It isn't that," said Lenny, laying her arm along the back of the seat and looking at Kay. "But you didn't like me at first, and you probably don't like me even now." "Liking is a feeble word," said Kay, evasively. "Oh," she said, As he had grown used to the darkness in the room, he could now distinguish certain details of the furnishings. He was particularly struck by a large picture which hung to the right of the door, and bent forward to see it more clearly. It represented a man in a judge's robe. He was sitting on a high throne-like seat, and the gilding of the seat stood out strongly in the picture. The strange thing was that the judge did not seem to be sitting in dignified composure, for his left arm was braced along the back and the side arm of his throne, while his right arm rested on nothing except for the hand which clutched the other arm of the chair. It was as if in a moment he might spring up with a violent and probably wrathful gesture to make some decisive observation or even pronounce a sentence. The accused might be imagined as standing on the lowest step, leading up to the chair of justice. The top steps, which were covered with a yellowish carpet, were shown in the picture. Perhaps that is my judge, said Kay, pointing with his finger at the picture. I know him, said Lenny, and she looked at the picture too. He often comes here. That picture was painted when he was young, but it could never have been in the least like him, for he's a small man, almost a dwarf. Yet in spite of that, he had himself drawn out to the length in the portrait, for he's madly vain like everybody else here. But I'm a vain person too, and very much upset that you don't like me in the least. To this last statement, Kay replied merely by putting his arms around her and drawing her to him. She leaned her head against his shoulder in silence, but to the rest of her remarks he answered, What's the man's rank? He's an examining magistrate, she said, seizing the hand with which Kay held her and beginning to play with his fingers. Only an examining magistrate again, said Kay, in disappointment. The higher officials keep themselves well hidden. But he's sitting in a chair of state. That's all invention, said Lenny, with her face bent over his hand. Actually, he is sitting on a kitchen chair, with an old horse rug doubled under him. But must you eternally be brooding over your case? She queried slowly. No, not at all, said Kay. In fact, I probably brood far too little over it. That isn't the mistake you make, said Lenny. You're too unyielding. That's what I've heard. Who told you that? Asked Kay. He could feel her body against his breast and gazed down at her rich, dark, firmly knotted hair. I should give away too much if I told you that, replied Lenny. Please don't ask me for names. Take my warning to heart instead, and don't be so unyielding in the future. You can't fight against this court. You must confess to guilt. Make your confession at the first chance you get. Until you do that, there's no possibility of getting out of their clutches. None at all. Yet even then, you won't manage it without help from inside. But you needn't trouble your head about that. I'll see to it myself. You know a great deal about this court and the intrigues that prevail in it, said Kay, lifting her onto his knee, and she was leaning too heavily against him. That's better, she said, making herself at home on his knee by smoothing her skirt and pulling her blouse straight. Then she clasped both her hands round his neck, leaned back, and looked at him I seem to recruit women helpers, he thought, almost in surprise. First Fräulein Burstner, then the wife of the usher, and now this little nurse who appears to have some incomprehensible desire for me. She sits there on my knee as if it were the only place for her. No, said Lenny, shaking her head slowly. Then I can't help you. But you don't in the least want my help. It doesn't matter to you. You're stiff-necked and never will be convinced. After a while, she asked, have you got a sweetheart? No, said Kay. Oh, yes, you have, she said. Well, yes, I have, said Kay. Just imagine it. I have denied her existence, and yet I am actually carrying her photograph in my pocket. At her entreaty, he showed her Elsa's photograph. She studied it, curled up on his knee. It was a snapshot taken of Elsa as she was finishing a whirling dance, such as she often gave at the cabaret. Her skirt was still flying around her like a fan. Her hands were planted on her firm hips, and with her chin thrown up, she was laughing over her shoulder at someone who did not appear in the photograph. She's very tightly laced, said Lenny, indicating the place where, in her opinion, the tight lacing was evident. I don't like her. She's rough and clumsy. But perhaps she's soft and kind to you. One might guess that from the photograph. Big, strong girls like that often can't help being soft and kind. But would she be capable of sacrificing herself for you? No, said Kay. She is neither soft nor kind. Nor would she be capable of sacrificing herself for me. And up till now, I have demanded neither the one thing nor the other from her. In fact, I've never even examined this photograph as carefully as you have. So she doesn't mean so very much to you, said Lenny. She isn't your sweetheart after all. Oh yes, replied Kay. I refuse to take back my words. Well, granted that she's your sweetheart, said Lenny. You wouldn't miss her very much, all the same, if you were to lose her or exchange her for someone else. Me, for instance. Certainly, said Kay, smiling. That's conceivable. But she has one great advantage over you. She knows nothing about my case, and even if she knew, she wouldn't bother her head about it. She wouldn't try to get me to be less unyielding. That's no advantage, said Lenny. If that's all the advantage she has over me, I shan't give up hope. Has she any physical defect? Any physical defect? Asked Kay. Yes, said Lenny, for I have a slight one. Look, she held up her right hand and stretched out the two middle fingers, between which the connecting web of skin reached almost to the top joint. Short as the fingers were, in the darkness Kay could not make out at once what she wanted to show him. So she took his hand and made him feel it. What a freak of nature, said Kay, and he added, when he had examined the whole hand, what a pretty little paw. Then he looked on with a kind of pride, while Kay, in astonishment, kept pulling the two fingers apart and then putting them side by side again, until at last he kissed them lightly and let them go. Oh, she cried at once, you have kissed me. She hastily scrambled up until she was kneeling open-mouthed on his knees. Kay looked up at her almost dumbfounded, now that she was so close to him. She gave out a bitter, exciting odor, like pepper. She clasped his head to her. She bent over him, arranged her for me after all. Then her knees slipped with a faint cry. She almost fell on the carpet. Kay put his arms round her and told to hold her up, and was pulled down to her. "You belong to me now," she said. "Here's the key of the door. Come whenever you like," were her last words, and as he took his leave, a final aimless kiss landed on his shoulder. When he stepped out onto the pavement, a light rain was falling. He was making for the middle of the street, so as perhaps to catch a last glimpse of Lenny at her window. But a car which was waiting before the house, and which in his distraction he had not even noticed, suddenly omitted his uncle, who seized him by the arms and banged him against the house door as if he wanted to nail him there. "Joseph!" he cried. "How could you do it? You have damaged your case badly, which was beginning to go quite well. You hide yourself away with a filthy little trollop, who is obviously the lawyer's mistress, into the bargain, and stay away for hours. You don't even seek any pretext. You conceal nothing. No, you're quite open. You simply run off to her and stay beside her. And all this time, we three sit there, your uncle, who is doing his best for you, the lawyer, who has to be won over to your side, above all the chief clerk of the court, a man of importance who is actually in charge of your case at its present stage. There we sit, consulting how to help you. I have to handle the lawyer circumspectly, and the lawyer in turn the clerk of the court. And one might think you had every reason to give me at least some support, instead of which you absent yourself. You were away so long that there was no concealing it. Of course, the two gentlemen, being men of the world, didn't talk about it. They spared my feelings, but finally, even they could no longer ignore it, and as they couldn't mention it, they said nothing at all. We sat